Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the why, what and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 18th June 2018. So let's start. For the coming few days, we will be discussing some questions that were asked in the preliminary examination in the year 2018 and were also covered in the Daily News Simplified and the Focus Magazine. This will help you in understanding the importance of DNS and Focus magazines in your preparation. Further, this exercise will help you in effectively using the DNS and Focus magazine for the preparation of the prelims 2019. So today we will cover only one question. A question was asked in the prelims related to the Indian Regional Navigation System or the IRNSS. Now this is a part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the current events of national and international importance. The question read, with reference to the Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System, consider the following statements. The first statement is, IRNSS has 3 satellites in the geostationary and 4 satellites in the geosynchronous orbits. This statement is correct. The second statement reads, IRNSS covers entire India and about 5,500 square kilometers beyond its border. This statement is wrong because it covers 1,500 kilometers. And the third statement is, India will have its own satellite navigation system with full global coverage by middle of 2019. It will not have full global coverage. So this statement is also wrong. So in this case, the correct answer is A, 1 only. Now the IRNSS topic was covered in the Daily News Simplified of 11th April 2018. That is 2 months before preliminary examination. And the first statement, that is IRNSS has 3 satellites in geostationary and 4 satellites in geosynchronous orbits, has been clearly mentioned in this screenshot here. In the geosynchronous orbit, A, B, F and G satellites, that is 4 satellites, and in the geostationary orbit, 3 satellites, that is C, D and E. So both these aspects of the first statement are present in the Daily News Simplified of 11th April 2018. Further, the second statement mentioned in the question was also discussed in the 11th April DNS. Now it was provided that it can also service regions extending up to 1,500 kilometers around Indian boundary. So if you remember this fact, you can easily eliminate the second statement provided here. And all the facts related to IRNSS or Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System were covered in the Focus magazine of May month. So we have found that the question that appeared in the preliminary examination in the year 2018 was also covered in detail in the Focus magazine of May edition and in the DNS of the 11th April 2018. So this shows that the topics that are covered in the Focus magazine and the DNS are important from the exam point of view. Further, in the coming days, more questions will be discussed in a similar manner. The editorial on page number 8 is related to a critical note on the recently released Composite Water Management Index, which was released by Niti Aayog. Now, the Composite Water Management Index has been discussed on 15th June 2018 in the DNS. This topic will fall under the geography under the topic resources. And previously in the year 2015, a question was asked based on the water scarcity in India. The question read, India is well endowed with freshwater resources. Critically examine why it still suffers from water scarcity. So this topic becomes important for us from the mains point of view under the General Studies paper 1. Now let us try to understand some of the key facts highlighted by this editorial. The editorial says that according to the Composite Water Management Index developed by Niti Aayog, about 70% of the water resources are identified as polluted. Now regarding the Composite Water Management Index, the indicators that are considered are groundwater restoration, irrigation management, on-farm water use and drinking water supply, and the water policy framework of states. Now these points have been discussed in the second point here. Further, the editorial says that it presumes that by rating the state's performance based on index will foster competitive and cooperative federalism. So the editorial says that by rating states' performance based on an index, a competitive and cooperative federalism will start. Now some of the observations and issues that have been highlighted by the Composite Water Management Index that is brought by the Niti Aayog are that states such as Gujarat, MP, Andhra Pradesh, etc. have initiated good reforms for judicious use of water. Although some of the states are doing well on the judicious use of water, other states which are the most populated states as well, like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, have failed to respond to such challenges. Further, it says that Tamil Nadu, which scores averagely on the Niti Aayog's index, does well on augmentation of water resources. However, it fails on ensuring sustainable use for farming. So the observations are that there is widespread variations among states about the judicious use of water or the policies. So in this case, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have not responded well while there are other states like Gujarat and MP which have initiated reforms for judicious water use. And states like Tamil Nadu, which score averagely on the Niti Aayog's index, have started augmentation of water resources by rainwater harvesting, etc. However, it has failed in ensuring sustainable use for farming. For example, it has not discouraged water guzzling crops like sugarcane in the summer season or the water scarcity season. Now, editorial further highlights that what needs to be done to solve the problem of water scarcity and pollution in India. So, it says that there are two focus areas. First includes the augmentation of watersheds, which can store more good water for use in agriculture and to serve habitations. Further, a strict pollution control enforcement is required. So, the two focus areas are augmentation of watersheds and strict pollution control enforcement. The editorial further says that Mihir Sharma committee had called for a user-centric approach to water management. Now, the user-centric approach advocates the decentralization of irrigation command areas and offering high financial flows to well-performing states. Now, these financial flows will be through a National Irrigation Management Fund. So, the Mihir Sharma committee calls for a user-centric approach to water management, and this approach calls for decentralization of irrigation command areas and offering high financial flows to well-performing states. And these financial flows will be provided through a National Irrigation Management Fund. Now, the editorial further says that now for implementing of such suggestions like the one given by the Mihir Sharma committee, awarding an index should help advance such schemes and making states feel the need to be competitive. So, the editorial says that to implement suggestions like the one given by the Mihir Sharma committee, the Niti Aayog's Composite Water Management Index will be helpful because it will make the states feel the need for competition and it will usher in an era of cooperative and competitive federalism. The editorial says that the approaches provided by Mihir Sharma committee etc. are although good for managing water resources. However, these suggestions may not resolve the seemingly intractable interstate river water disputes. So, such approaches may not resolve the problems of interstate river water disputes. So, further, the editorial says that groundwater extraction patterns need to be better understood through robust data collection because it says that presently less than 5% of about 12 million wells are now under study. So, this shows that the data is not representative of the problem. Further, the editorial says that because of steady urbanization, there is a need for a new management paradigm. Now, this new management paradigm should include the augmentation of sources of clean drinking water supply and treatment technologies which will encourage reuse of water. Further, the editorial says that pollution can be curbed by levying suitable costs. So, the editorial says that the approaches provided by Mihir Sharma committee may not solve the problems like interstate river water disputes. Further, there is a need for groundwater extraction patterns to be studied properly through robust data. And the urbanization calls for a new management paradigm. And finally, pollution can be curbed by levying suitable costs. Further, the editorial concludes that there is a need to revamp national and state institutions and update the laws. However, it finally says that a legal mandate would be better than just competition and cooperation because a legal mandate would make governments accountable. In this article, we have studied the basic objectives of CWMI index and some basic observations related to this. Further, we have studied the performance of various states according to the CWMI index of Niti Aayog. Finally, we have studied the suggestions provided by the editorial for improving the water management situation. And finally, the editorial says that a legal mandate would work better than just competition and cooperation because a legal mandate would make the governments more accountable as compared to the competition and cooperation. Now, all the points that are mentioned here are important from mains point of view and can be used in any question related to water scarcity. With this, let us move on to the next article. Now, the news article on page number 13 is related to the MCLR or the marginal cost of funding based lending rate. Now, this topic will fall under the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic economic development. Now, this is important because previously in the year 2016, a question was directly asked based on the MCLR. So, we will try to understand the issues that are involved in this news article. The article says that RBI has yet not allowed its customers to shift to the current MCLR system from the erstwhile base rate system. So, we will try to understand what MCLR is and what is the issue involved in shifting to MCLR. The RBI has yet not allowed banks to shift their customers to current MCLR structure from the erstwhile base rate regime. The article further says that this is leading to customers paying higher interest rates on home and auto loans. So let us understand what MCLR means. So simply MCLR refers to a minimum interest rate of a bank below which it cannot lend. Further, it is an internal benchmark or reference rate for the bank. So the MCLR is the minimum interest rate of a bank below which it cannot lend. So simply it lends over and above the MCLR rate. Now let us understand what is the issue. Now previously the base rate which was used was a loan pricing mechanism and was replaced by the MCLR, that is the marginal cost of funding based lending rate, from April 1, 2016. And this 1 year MCLR of banks is lower than that of the base rate. For example, SBI's base rate is about 8.7%, while its 1 year MCLR is just 8.25. So there's a difference of 45 basis points. This shows that the use of MCLR will make the loan cheaper as compared to the use of base rate. Now, although the base rate was to be replaced by the MCLR from April 1, 2016, yet RBI has not allowed the MCLR to be used by the banks. Now, this is because an internal study by the RBI indicates that if banks offer their customers the lower interest rate, public sector banks will incur a 40,000 crore loss. And since state-run banks are already reeling under huge losses due to a rise in NPAs in the previous financial year, asking them to shift to their customers to MCLR could impact the interest income further. Thus, an internal study by RBI says that if the banks use MCLR for lending, it will lead to a loss of 40,000 crores. This is because the state-run banks are already under pressure due to NPAs in the previous financial year. Now, let us try to understand why was MCLR introduced in the first place. Now, the RBI decided to shift from base rate to MCLR because the rates based on marginal cost of funds are more sensitive to changes in the policy rates. Further, prior to the MCLR system, different banks were following different methodologies for calculation of base rate or the minimum rate. So, the two reasons for introducing MCLR were that the rates based on marginal cost of fund or the MCLR are more sensitive to the changes in policy rates. And secondly, before the MCLR system, different banks were following different methodologies for calculation of base rate or the minimum rate. Now, let us try to understand the basic objectives or the aims of introducing the MCLR. The first is that it aims at improving the transmission of policy rates into lending rates of banks. Secondly, it aims at bringing transparency in the methodology followed by banks for determining interest rates on advances. Thirdly, to ensure availability of bank credit at interest rates which are fair to borrowers as well as to the banks. And finally, to enable the banks to become more competitive and enhance their long-run value and contribution to the economic growth. So the aim of introducing MCLR was that to improve the transmission of policy rates. Secondly, to bring transparency in the methodology used by banks. Thirdly, to ensure availability of bank credit at interest rates which are fair to borrowers as well as to banks. And finally, to make the banks more competitive and enhance their long-run value and contribution to the economic growth. So under this article, we have learned that the RBI has yet not allowed banks to shift their customers to current MCLR structure from the erstwhile base rate regime. Further, the MCLR refers to the minimum interest rate of a bank below which it cannot lend, and it is an internal benchmark or the reference rate. Now, the MCLR system was introduced from April 1, 2016, and it was supposed that the MCLR system will make the loans cheaper. However, the RBI study has found that the introduction of MCLR at this stage will lead to public sector banks incurring a whopping loss of 40,000 crores. Further, this is because of the state-run banks are already under pressure due to non-performing assets in the previous financial year. And the reasons for introducing MCLR were that the rates based on marginal cost of funds are more sensitive to the changes in policy rates. And also, previously the different banks were following different methodologies for calculation of base rate or the minimum rate. And finally, the MCLR aims at improving the transmission of policy rate, bringing about transparency in the methodology, ensuring the availability of bank credit at interest rate which are fair to borrowers as well as banks, and to make the banks more competitive and increase their contribution in the economic growth. Now, in the year 2016, a question was asked based on the MCLR or the marginal cost of funds based lending rate. The question asked that what is or are the purpose or purposes of the MCLR announced by RBI. The first statement was that these guidelines help improve the transparency in methodology followed by banks for determining the interest rates on advances. This statement is correct as we have learned in this article. And secondly, these guidelines help ensure availability of bank credit at interest rates which are fair to borrowers as well as the banks. So this statement is also correct as studied in the article. So the correct answer in this case is C, both 1 and 2. With this, let us move on to the next article. The article on page number 11 is related to the visit of External Affairs Minister to European countries for 7 days. Now, this visit will involve discussions related to the Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement or the BTIA. This is a developing story and has not been included in the daily news headline because it will be covered in the coming days. But just for the background knowledge, we'll try to understand the basic issues involved in the BTIA agreement. And in the year 2017, a question was asked in the preliminary examination based on the BTIA. Now, this topic falls under the General Studies paper 2 under the subtopic International Relations. Now, the issues between India and the European Union related to the BTIA have been covered in the Focus magazine under the November issue. So, we will try to understand the issues that are involved in India and European negotiations. The first issue is related to the protection of the foreign investments. Now, the provisions under BTIA make it obligatory for the foreign investors to initially pursue Indian judicial and administrative remedies for at least a period of 5 years before pursuing a claim under the international law. Now, this provision is being opposed by European Union because it does not want foreign investors to pursue Indian judicial and administrative remedies first. And the European Union wants the foreign investors to directly pursue their claim under the international law. The second issue is related to the movement of the skilled workers. Now, India wants a greater ease of movement of temporary skilled workers to provide services in the EU. However, after the financial crisis of 2008, European unions have been pursuing a policy of protectionism. This is because of the rise in unemployment in EU countries. Moreover, liberalization in immigration policies is generally subject to the decisions of individual countries. Thus, it limits the mandate of EU to negotiate with India. The third issue is related to the market access for wines and spirits of the European Union countries. Now, the EU wants a greater market access of its wines and spirits, and that India should lower its tariffs for their imports. So, the European Union wants India to cut down tariffs on the imports of wines and spirits from EU countries. However, wines and spirits are considered luxury items in India, and therefore there is no reasonable cause for such a tariff reduction. Further, EU is not granting data secure certification to India. Now, this is important because it would facilitate the cross-border transfer of personal data that is required by the Indian companies, especially in the IT industry. So, the EU is not granting data secure certification to India, and this is hindering the cross-border transfer of personal data, which is required by the IT industry in India. Also, recently EU has passed the GDPR or the General Data Protection Rules, and the details of these GDPR rules are still awaited, and the impact of GDPR rules on Indian industry is still to be analyzed. So, the data security issue will be negotiated in the background of the new GDPR rules. And the fifth major issue between India and EU on the BTIA negotiations are that agriculture products have been excluded from the negotiation. Now, the European countries give huge subsidy to their agro products, due to which Indian agriculture products are not able to compete. Further, EU has also asked India for a change in the government procurement policy. We also know that the government procurement policy are the biggest issue in the WTO negotiations as well. Further, India has denied these prospective changes as agriculture procurement is followed on the basis of developmental motive rather than profiteering motive. Thus, India procures agriculture products for its food security reasons and not for profiteering motive. So, the key issues involved in broad-based trade and investment agreement between India and EU are the protection of foreign investments, movement of skilled workers. The third important issue is related to the market access for its wine and spirits. The fourth is the data secure certification to India because it would facilitate the cross-border transfer of personal data. And finally, the negotiations on agriculture products have been excluded in BTIA. Now, BTIA is important because in the year 2017, a question was asked in the preliminary examination. The question read, the broad-based trade and investment agreement BTIA is sometimes seen in news in the context of negotiations held between India and the correct answer in this case was A, European Union. Now, as a question has been asked in the preliminary examination, similarly a question can be asked in the mains examination as well. So, you should attempt a practice question based on this topic which is provided here. With this, let us move on to the next article. The article on page number 11 is related to a critique of the National Health Protection Scheme recently announced by the Government of India in the budget of 2017 and 18. Now, this critique has been provided by Indian Medical Association. Now, this topic falls under the General Studies paper 2 of the mains examination syllabus under the subtopic issues relating to health and education. So, under this we will try to understand some basic facts related to the National Health Scheme, that is the Ayushman Bharat, and the critique provided by the IMA. Now, about the National Health Protection Scheme, Ayushman Bharat is known as the National Health Protection Scheme. It will cover over 10 crore poor and vulnerable families and will have approximately 50 crore beneficiaries. It will provide coverage up to Rs 5 lakh per family per year for secondary and tertiary hospitalization. So, the secondary and tertiary hospitalization should be kept in mind. It is not related to the primary health care. Secondly, Ayushman Bharat or the National Health Protection Mission will be an entitlement based scheme. And this entitlement will be decided on the basis of deprivation criteria in the socio-economic caste census database. Thirdly, the beneficiaries can avail the benefits in both public and empaneled private facilities. And finally, to control the cost, the payments for the treatment will be done on a package rate, which will be defined by the government in advance. So the Ayushman Bharat scheme is a scheme for poor and vulnerable families and will provide 5 lakh rupees per family for the secondary and tertiary care hospitalization. And the entitlement will be decided on the basis of SECC. The beneficiaries can avail benefits in both public and private hospitals, and to control the costs, the payments for the treatment will be done on a package rate that will be decided by the government. So these facts should be kept in mind from preliminary point of view as well. Now the critique has been provided by the Indian Medical Association. The IMA considers that the NHPS or the National Health Protection Scheme has conceptual deficits and operational flaws. Secondly, the rates quoted by Government of India for various medical procedures is very low, and it would not cover more than 30% of the cost of the procedure. Further, the National Health Protection Scheme does not create any form of national assets such as medical infrastructure, which includes hospitals, medical staff, or doctors. And finally, the insurance driven healthcare would only benefit insurance companies, since expenditure on NHPS does not incentivize hospitals, doctors, or patients. So, the critique provided by IMA is that it has conceptual and operational flaws. Secondly, the rates quoted by Government of India for various medical procedures is very low. Thirdly, the NHPS does not create any form of national asset. And finally, the insurance-driven healthcare would benefit only the insurance companies because the expenditure on NHPS does not incentivize hospital doctors or patients. And finally, the IMA has provided a recommendation to remove these flaws. The recommendation says that government should allow NHPS to be purchased directly from the hospital providers, and by this, the third-party involvement of insurance companies can be removed. So this will incentivize the hospitals, doctors, and the patients as well. Now the points that we have covered in this article are important from mains point of view. Now you should attempt this practice question which is based on this health scheme. With this, let us move on to the next article. There is a news article on page number 1 and on page number 7. This is related to a new artillery gun that has been introduced in the Indian Armed Forces arsenal. The name of this artillery gun is Dhanush. So this topic will fall under the General Studies paper 3 under the subtopic Indigenization of Technology. We will try to understand some basic facts related to this Dhanush artillery gun. The basic facts related to the Dhanush artillery gun is that it is an upgraded version of the Swedish Bofors gun which was procured by India in the mid 1980s. So this is an important fact. Now other important fact is that it has a demonstrated range of about 38 kilometers. Further, it is also compatible with all North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that is the NATO ammunition system. So these are the 3 important facts related to Dhanush artillery gun. Now the word Dhanush should not be confused with Dhanush missile system, which is different from the Dhanush artillery gun system. Now the Dhanush missile system is a surface to surface missile, or it is a ship to ship missile. And finally, it is a naval version of the Prithvi 3 missile. So these features should be kept in mind from preliminary point of view. Now after understanding certain basic facts related to the Dhanush artillery gun and the Dhanush missile system, you should be able to answer the question given here. So attempt this question and put your answers in the comment section. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us move on to the question for the day.